children. It's interesting, the Apostle Paul in the New Testament, he calls Timothy, he calls others his spiritual sons and daughters. There's the reproducing of that spiritualness that we're reflecting, that we're called to reproduce. Adam and Eve were called to reproduce it in others. So that, I know you've all heard the phrase before, God doesn't have grandchildren. He only has children. So that it can be reproduced in somebody else's life and they become the child of God. So number one, God says to Adam, I want you to reflect my image. Number two, I want you to reproduce that image. Number three, he says, I want you to reign. I want you to be a steward. We sang the song, God, you reign. Forever and ever, you reign. You think about it? Genesis 1, God says to Adam and Eve, which transferred comes to you and I, we're called to reign. Now, for too many years, sometimes we tend to think of that as reign means using for our enjoyment. A use and abuse. That's not what Genesis is talking about. When Genesis here is talking about reign, the words that are being used, the Hebrew words are to cultivate. And the word cultivate means to nourish, to help grow, to help bring to maturity. So Adam was called to nourish that which he was called to reign over. Not to use it for his own selfish motives, but to nourish it, to bring it to maturity. He was called to keep it. The Hebrew word for keep means to guard or protect. Guard or protect it. We're going to see, and we all know what happens with these, but we're going to see it shortly. The fourth purpose of Adam was to be in relationship daily with God. And we all know the story, the fact with Adam and Eve that God would come down daily and walk with Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden. And the word Eden means delight. So it was a delightful, beautiful place that God was walking with Adam and Eve in a daily relationship. And the only way that Adam could do these first three things, and Eve could do them, is when they were walking in that daily relationship. And yet, we know what took place, do we not? We know that when we continue reading, that Satan casts a doubt in Eve's mind. Satan cast it out and said, did God really say that? Will you really die? Satan takes the form of the serpent, and I can just hear the serpent just sort of with a hissing sound. Did God really say, with slurring the yeses, did he really say that? And causing doubt in Adam and Eve. So what we read here in Genesis chapter 3, when the woman saw that the fruit of the tree was good for food and was pleasing to the eye and desirable for attaining wisdom, she took some and she ate it. Now, we're not going to get into this a whole lot, but I want you just to know this in your mind. If you would actually take time to look in Genesis chapter 2, 16 and 17, so just a chapter before this, Genesis 2, 16 and 17, Yahweh God tells Adam, not to eat of the tree of knowledge of good and evil. And the next verse, it talks about how God created Eve as a partner for Adam. So what is thought? What is thought is that God, Yahweh God, told Adam, don't eat of the tree. It's thought that Eve wasn't created yet at that time. So Adam passes it on to Eve. Who does Satan go to? The serpent goes to Eve. I'm not saying she was at fault, because what does it say here? Eve gave it to her husband who was there with her. How many commercials or TV shows haven't we seen throughout your lifetime that shows like Eve taking up the apple or whatever the fruit it was, and Adam's off some other place? He's not even in the area. Really, Genesis says that Adam's there with Eve. Adam doesn't step up and say, honey, remember I told you. Yahweh God said, do not do this. This is a choice we're making, and we can't make this choice. So they see that it's desirable to the eye. It's pleasing to the eye. It's desirable for gaining wisdom. And they both took it, and they both ate it. And when the eyes of both of them were opened, they realized they were naked. They had shame. Prior to this, they didn't have shame. They didn't realize they were not clothed. And that shame is not just simply the fact of being naked, but the shame is being naked emotionally, being naked spiritually. I mean, how many of us actually want everybody else to know everything about our life? Our thoughts, our words, our deeds, what we've done maybe in the secretness of our life, in past life? No, we don't want that, because we can be ashamed of that. For Adam and Eve, they knew no shame because they were walking in relationship with God. Genesis 2:25 says, the man and his wife were both naked and they felt no shame. But when the sin came into their life, when they took that choice of what Yahweh God gave them, they felt the shame. How many of us haven't within our life, we know something's wrong? You know you shouldn't do it. And yet you do it anyway. We know we should not do that, but we step into that area anyway. And you say, God, I'm sorry, I won't do it again. And a few months later, or even sooner, we fall into that trap again. And we make that choice again. And then we feel ashamed. But there's hope. There's hope for us. There's hope for me. There's hope for you. That's what we're doing here in church. If there was no hope, I wouldn't be here. I don't think you would be here either. So it takes place, though. This fall takes place. But what happens then? There's a separation. The four things that Adam is called to do or to be in relationship with Yahweh God are tainted. They're tainted. And the sin not only negates our ability to reflect God's image, but it also starves our ability to reproduce. So what we see first is the reflection that Adam and Eve were called. Genesis 5, we read, Adam lived 130 years, and then he had a son in his own likeness. Catch that? Not in God's likeness, but in Adam's own likeness, in his own image, and he named him Seth. Well, you remember who Seth's brothers were, Cain and Abel. Cain kills Abel because of a jealousy. The sin that Adam and Eve walked in, that decision that they made to do that which God said, don't do it, it had a ripple effect, and we have the first dysfunctional family. Right there with Adam and Eve. First two sons have a fight, one kills the other. Adam has another son in his image, not in God's image. And the reproducing, Adam is not able to reproduce in God's image anymore either. So what we see, what we read, is the book of Romans says, all have sinned and come short of the glory of God. Adam's not able to reproduce in God's image. In our sin, we're not able to reproduce in that image. All of us have sinned and come short of the glory of God. Some people call it original sin, which comes from Adam and Eve. And that sin is moved on to all of us. That rock thrown in the calm lake, those ripples go out all the way to the shores. And that sin of Adam and Eve is in my life. The ripple effect has affected me. It's affected you. It affects our lack of ability to reflect God. It affects our lack of ability